Feature film and broadcast animation were two areas of entertainment that greatly enriched the unique visual palette of the 80s. It was artists and developments from both inside and outside these industries that contributed to the rich body of work being produced, all in an era with its own distinct trends and opportunities. Star Wars had proven that there was a market for big-budget fantasy and sci-fi-themed movies, and thus making it feasible for other filmmakers to get their projects off the ground. It was not uncommon for directors to already have the work of specific illustrators in mind that matched their vision. These artists were frequently attracted to a project as conceptual designers to lay down the visual foundation. To bring their rich worlds to life demanded the tireless craftsmanship of countless individuals. All the little quirks and real-world imperfections of the work done by hand provided a true human touch. It made even the strangest among creatures come alive and bond with their audience. However, new digital technology was looming on the horizon, ready to be used by daring filmmakers. The emerging technology was not only a tool, but also a recurring theme in storytelling, exploring the prospect of the computer conquering its role in society and personal life. It still seemed a faraway prospect for many at the time, as computers were just starting to make their way into the homes, being used for administrative tasks and innocent entertainment. A market that rapidly picked up steam was that of home entertainment. It was the phenomenon that contemporary press referred to as the video boom. The VCR, in particular, saw a rapid adaptation thanks to their ability to record broadcasted shows and movies.
Eye of the tiger.
Pre-recorded tapes still demanded a premium at this point, with $80 for a feature film being no exception. The video rental market was therefore a welcome alternative for all VCR owners. One aspect that still plagued the home video consumer of the early 80s was the various competing video formats. Next to a variety of tape standards, multiple video disc formats also hit the market.
Interesting. A record player that produces beautiful sound and pictures through my TV. Now that is an entirely new dimension in entertainment.
The video disc format with the most futuristic appeal was the shiny Laserdisc. As a storage media, it brought a greater fidelity in visuals and sound, although for consumers, it lacked the functionality to record their own content. Its properties, like instant access to any scene, made it particularly useful for interactive media. The arcade game, Dragon's Lair, took full advantage of this feature. A Laserdisc inside the arcade cabinet stored an interactive animated movie. In terms of game mechanics, it was rather simple, playing back short movie clips according to the player's actions. However, it would not take away from its engaging experience at launch. One of the leading forces behind the project was former Disney animator Don Bluth. After leaving Disney, his new company had quickly earned a track record, being involved in an animated segment for Xanadu, followed by their in-house produced animated feature, The Secret of Nim. The advent of the Laserdisc was a welcome new business prospect for the filmmaker. Laserdisc was an example of the merging of technology and art to create a new media form, showcasing a range of production techniques, from live action to hand-drawn animation to stylish computer graphics. The hype around Laserdisc games, although short-lived, brought a new wave of excitement in the arcades. The contemporary trend of arcade games and the rising computer graphics perfectly came together in the cult classic Tron. At this point, a digital world was still an abstract concept for audiences, not too far removed from the mystical worlds of fantasy fiction. The virtual world created in Tron also had an underlying fantasy concept, blended with design cues from real-world technology. They were brought to life using some surprising low-tech methods, for instance with airbrushed backgrounds. The computer graphics shots would stretch across 20 minutes of the picture and were split among 4 companies. Robert Abel and Associates delivered the transition into the virtual world using their vector graphics workflow from their TV commercials. They filmed the shot in multiple passes each time using different camera filters, resulting in a richly colored and detailed sequence. The visual glitches that happened while filming the vector graphics display were kept in the final piece, and in a way, enhanced the electronic look.
The system's got more bugs than a bait store.
The remaining shots required the unique qualities of the computer graphics labs, Magi and III. III tackled the scenes with more complex geometry, using their digitizing technology to turn blueprints on paper into full 3D models. Magi's responsive Synthavision software, on the other hand, was more suitable for the dynamic action sequences. But to set new standards in computer animation took the combined talents of traditionally trained Disney animators and the experts at the computer lab. The Disney animators used their know-how in animation and choreographed the scenes in detail on paper first. An added challenge for the filmmakers was to create a cohesive style in the work of the different companies and the reliance on both digital and optical effects. Fortunately, they could build on the strong foundation set by the art department. Among the conceptual artists working on Tron were 2 highly influential figures, cartoonist Mobius and futurist Syd Mead. They brought their own expertise to the project. Mobius added his fantasy touch, and Mead his skill in industrial design. Syd Mead was also a pivotal figure behind the design of Blade Runner. The movie hit theaters the same year as Tron, but is in terms of art style a 180-degree departure. The underlying dark noir concept demanded a grounded design philosophy, taking existing technology and slightly twisting it to make it futuristic. Coming from an industrial design background, Mead meticulously thought each object through in terms of its engineering, history, and usability. He was a true master in combining the artistic with the rational, visualizing imaginative settings and scenarios, while always keeping in check the reason why things were looking and behaving the way they were. Syd Mead's work and influence stretched far beyond Hollywood. The bulk of his work involved drawing utopian futuristic scenes for companies in the field of electronics and automotive, helping to visualize how their products of tomorrow would exist in everyday life. In contrast to the paintings for Blade Runner, these portrayed the more optimistic look of the future. Another big name in conceptual design, Ralph McQuarrie, equally made his mark on cinema, forming together with Joe Johnston the main force of conceptual design behind the Star Wars trilogy. His concept paintings had been an important instrument for George Lucas to help sell the idea of Star Wars to the movie studio. Similar to Syd Mead's work, they were not mere isolated representations of the landscapes or vehicles. His cinematic compositions captured a narrative. This made the paintings come alive and feel as stills from the movie. At the roots of these production paintings lay a series of layout sketches and color studies to explore a certain setting. McQuarrie's general style of coloring can be described as bright and clean. It gave the work an illustrated quality that visualized appealing worlds, despite the conflict often portrayed. Some of McQuarrie's artwork would also make it to the final picture. He participated in the matte painting department, led by Harrison Ellenshaw, a group of highly skilled painters who were able to paint photorealistic backgrounds. Matte paintings were used to realize expansive cityscapes and sets that would be impossible or simply too costly to build. The location of Cloud City in The Empire Strikes Back relied heavily on matte paintings. They were carefully integrated with photographs of miniatures and live action to make the final shot. It had only been a few short years since the visual effects industry had been revitalized thanks to cinematic spectacles of Lucas and Spielberg. With their craft once again in full demand, these artists could push the boundaries of what is possible with traditional effects, perfecting old crafts like stop motion and incorporating computers into the workflow to control camera rigs. This was a huge step forward, since miniature shots were generally filmed in multiple passes. With the precision of the computer, they could repeat the dynamic camera movements among all passes. The rich worlds and fantasy-filled adventures of contemporary cinema captured the imagination of kids worldwide in the early 80s, eager to experience their own adventures through their action figures. The artwork on toy packaging naturally helped to sell the product, but they were equally important in enhancing the overall experience after purchase. For instance, the beautiful paintings for the Masters of the Universe packaging drew kids into the magical world of Eternia and helped to capture their imagination when playing with their figures. Illustrating for packaging comes with its own set of rules and challenges. For starters, it's imperative that the artist plan ahead for logo and text placements, especially back in the day of inks and paints. They also have to keep in mind how their artwork would wrap around the packaging. Illustrators active in this field generally worked as freelancers. They had to base their art on early toy prototypes and bits and pieces of info in their briefing. Sometimes the lore of a given toy property hadn't been fully fleshed out, leading to some creative interpretations. An undeniable element that contributed to the massive success of Mattel's Masters of the Universe toy line was the cartoon show tie-in.
Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull!"
Masters of the Universe was among the first shows to break from the strict format from the established U.S. networks. Filmation, the animation studio behind the cartoon, was able to sell it as a syndicated show to independent networks. This pivotal trend break allowed the studio to expand the first season to 65 episodes, the equivalent of 5 regular network cartoons. It allowed Filmation to keep the studio staffed the whole year round and tell stories without having to deal with the strict censoring of the big networks. Broadcast animation still came with its tight budgetary restrictions that demanded some creative solutions. One of the tricks Filmation used was to overlay the painted backgrounds with black pencil sketches, a byproduct of the layout process. They quickly added detail and contributed to the show's distinct art style. It had overall been a turbulent time for the U.S. animation business, with an industry-wide animators' strike in 1982 as the climax. But at the same time, there were several rising opportunities. The cartoon adaptation of The Smurfs was a massive success, brightening up the predictable Saturday morning programming. Peyo's Blue Creatures ensured the importance of new productions. The growing number of independent networks and the new syndication model also further increased demand for cartoon shows. Kids' afternoons and Saturday mornings were soon dominated by watching their favorite new characters on TV.
I'll get you next time, Gadget. Next time.
Another pivotal change was in the regulation of advertising towards children in the U.S. Many of the strict rules were lifted in the early 80s, allowing toy companies to produce cartoon tie-ins to their toy properties. It was therefore a golden era for the toy industry. The total dominance of video games over the kids' leisure time was still years away. Combined with the deregulation of advertisement, opened up the way for new exciting toy lines. Over in Europe, the animated adaptations of classic European children's stories were also beloved. The Wonderful Adventures of Nils, Bannertail, and Maya the Honeybee just being a few examples. They all had an overarching outdoors setting, telling timeless stories and life lessons through the adventures of the animal characters. All these new animated shows would demand the artistry of countless individuals. At the roots lay visual development, a process to design characters, objects, and settings. The actual production process stretched across a range of crafts, from animating the characters with pencil and paper to cleaning up and inking each drawing on celluloid. The camera operator would photograph all the combined assets frame by frame to make the final shot. Although most animated productions shared a similar process, there was still a great variety in the work produced in the early 80s. Some stood out for their reliance on rotoscoping, the process of tracing filmed footage by hand, and thus resulting in more lifelike movements. Other productions, like The Last Unicorn, had a distinct art style. The Japanese artists at Topline Studio were inspired by the work of the Danish illustrator K. Nielsen, providing the production with an Art Nouveau touch, particularly where the backgrounds were concerned. Another way to deviate was in the use of different coloring media. On the animated short The Snowman, the artists used wax crayons to realize a true storybook feel. There was no denying that all the tireless work by hand added a natural and personal feel to these productions. And so, the powerful mix of creativity and opportunity drove the entertainment industry in the early 80s. Artists who originally operated outside this industry were making major contributions. Their individual background, art style, and unique look on design greatly contributed to the variety of the work produced. Combined with the craftsmanship inside the industry and drive to experiment with new technologies, resulted in countless new icons. Although the traditional art forms were still leading, computer graphics had earned its own little devoted place, providing a new tool to realize visual concepts. But with the pioneering work also came the unfortunate setbacks. Some projects, despite their initial promising results, were not further pursued, an example being a collaboration between the computer experts of Magi and Disney in 1983. Their demo showcased expressive hand-drawn character animation with dynamic camera movements in computer-generated environments. The project was deemed too expensive and was not further pursued inside Disney. The cost of keeping the computer graphics labs running demanded huge investments and became a growing struggle for the computer labs. The leap to lifelike visual effects or complex scenery that could rival traditional animation wouldn't be a straight path for the pioneers involved. What laid ahead was a time of rapid changes as we transitioned into the pop culture whirlwind of the mid-80s.